I know I've gotten some comments on this channel where people were asking me to cover some more information for PhD applicants. So this is the video for you, especially if you're confused between whether you should apply for a master's or PhD, what are pros and cons and what are some important things you should remember about it, then this video is for you. So today I'm going to cover basically 5 points. Number 1 is what is the admission criteria for master's versus PhD, because they are evaluated differently. Secondly, let's talk about do not apply for PhD if this is my criteria that PhD may not be right for you if any of these conditions are true. Third is advice for PhD applicants. If you end up applying for PhD, this is my advice. Fourth is what are the career prospects for masters versus PhD. And lastly, my story at UIUC. I was very close to going for PhD. Why did I not? I will share that in the end. So let's get started. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're finding our content useful. By the way, if you have any high school kids in your family or your own kids looking for study abroad or career guidance, then don't forget to check out our new venture 24northstar.com, where we work on giving career advice and study abroad help for people applying for their undergraduate applications abroad. Okay, let's get back to our main topic today. MS or PhD? That is the question. And sometimes I get clients who are like, okay, I'm not sure whether I should apply for masters. Maybe I can get more funding if I apply for PhD. Should I do that? Now, this is not an easy decision. So let's look into all the things that I've mentioned in the agenda before. And the first pointer is let's look at how the admission criteria differs between masters and PhD. Now here there is a fundamental difference between how the graduate school admission committee looks at masters and PhD applicants. PhD applicants, they look at as maybe hiring potential employees for the university itself, because as a PhD you are going to contribute a lot to the research happening in this university. You are most likely going to be funded by the department, that is the university is going to pay you directly for your research work, right? So they evaluate you more as a research employee. But for masters applicant, they know that you are eventually going to graduate out, you're going to join the industry or different positions outside the university. So they just treat you as a student and evaluate your profile based on their application criteria. So this is the fundamental difference in mindset when they evaluate your applications if you are applying for masters versus PhD. So now let's look more closely into the admission criteria for PhD, and this is what PhD admission committee tries to look for. They are looking for 2 things. First is they want to see whether your research work is really aligned with the work happening in this university and department or not, because if not, then it will be harder for them to fit you into one of the labs and really fund you. Secondly, they are concerned whether a professor is going to be available to advise you or not. So every PhD ultimately works with a research advisor, and these advisors play a big role in your academic journey and later on in your career journey as well. So it's imperative that university is able to find a good professor to advise you. So in case they are not able to find either of these 2 things, that is there is not a good research fit between your work and university's work, and secondly a professor is also not available, then under these conditions they may end up rejecting you even if you have a very stellar profile, right? So this is how it's very different for masters. For masters, it's not about finding the fit. If you overall have a good profile and you have put up a compelling application, you can get in. But in PhD, it's not your profile alone, it's the fit with this university and the work happening here that also matters equally importantly. So if you end up applying to wrong university, or you have not done that kind of homework, whether there are good enough professors available here to advise me or not, you might end up getting rejected for no fault of your own. So just keep this in mind, that if you are not really sure, then maybe by applying to PhD there is this extra factor that comes into picture which can get you rejected. Now let's take a look at the profile of one of our PhD clients who got in this year itself, and he got admits from Penn State and Purdue University for a PhD in chemical engineering. And in his profile, he has a high quality publication in physics of fluids and journal of fluids engineering, and also he has done an internship and full-time research assistantship at IIT Kanpur. So he has a good solid research experience and publications when he was applying, and this fitted well with Penn State and Purdue's chemical engineering department, and that is why they offered him a PhD admission. So keep this in mind when you're applying for PhD. your research areas, the kind of problems you want to work on, and all those things really have to fit in well with this university. Let's come to the second point. Do not apply to PhD if, and these are my conditions when I think PhD may not be a good idea for you. And first point here is when your research profile itself is not strong enough, or you don't have any good publications. Because as I said, the university's admission committee are trying to find potential research employees. So you should, as a qualification, you should have a good research profile to begin with. If you don't have that, then maybe you should not be applying for PhD, try for a master's instead. Secondly, if you do not have good research based LORs, if none of your LORs comment on your research skills or give a proof that yes, this person can conduct high quality research, then also your application is going to be pretty weak. Thirdly, if your work does not align with the professors in these universities, which we covered last time, so in that case also it may not be good idea to apply for PhD at this university. And lastly, very, very important, if you are not sure that you want to do PhD or not, then do not apply for PhD. PhD is a very specific programs. You're committing almost 5 to 7 years of your life into these things, and if you are not sure whether research is right for you or not, then it may not be a good idea to commit such a long time of your life, especially in your 20s, which is the peak of your working life. Then do not go for PhD if you're not sure, because it can end up in really a lot of frustration. And I've seen this happening with some of my classmates at UIUC and some other clients also. So if you're not sure, just apply for MS first and then explore, get a taste of research, and then decide that yes, I do want to do a PhD now, and then you can go for PhD. Now let's say you've done all this homework and you've come to the conclusion that yes, PhD is right for me. So here I'm going to now share my tips or advice for PhD applicants. And number one is advisor matters more than the rank of the university, in my opinion, because advisor is going to play a big role in your life. They are going to determine how quickly you are able to finish your PhD, how in-depth your research is going to be. They will take you to conferences along with them. They will introduce you to potential employers. And if you choose to pursue a route in academia, then again they are going to play a very big role in your networking and your applications to other universities. So research advisor is the biggest thing that's going to matter for you. So try to find a good advisor instead of worrying that much about the rank of the university. So if you go to a very good rank university but your advisor is pretty shitty, then your experience will end up very mediocre. You might end up getting frustrated. But even if you're going to a mediocre university but your research advisor is very good, then your experience would be different. So this is what I've heard from my PhD friends. So take it with a grain of salt, but do find out more on this thing, but do not be too fixated on the rank. I would say master's applicant pay more attention to the ranks, and it might make sense because they are eventually looking for the employability factors. But here, first of all, you have to finish your research, you have to get your PhD, and your advisor plays a very big role in that. Second advice would be contact professors as early as possible in the process. It's eventually you have to find a research advisor. So whether you're able to attract a good professor at a university matters a lot. And here I would say if you have friends in graduate schools or in different universities, then always look out for if a professor or if a lab is now looking for a new candidate, and if they can tell you of any vacancy in their labs and you approach the professor at that time, then he will be very open to taking you in, and that can get you a direct admit anyway. So try to constantly get in touch with good professors in your field, establish a rapport. Maybe you can work with them remotely, publish something, and that will also help you in getting an admission decision later on. So professors are all you should care about if you're a PhD applicant. And my last advice is have a clear research statement. So when it comes to the SOP, right, the master's SOP is more well balanced. You're showcasing your experience, you're talking about your different projects, etc., and you're giving them a reason for why am I applying for master's at this particular university. But for PhD, the SOP is very research oriented. Your research area, your research goal statement, you want to talk about as much as possible, and further it should be tailored to the university that you're applying to. So it should look relevant with the work that is happening happening in this university. And if you can do that, then your chances of admission really goes up. Okay, now let's talk about career prospects of master's versus PhD. Is doing PhD worth it when it comes to your career growth and all? And let's begin with a discussion of comparison of salaries, let's say. So if I compare the salaries, and I assume that these days I would say the average salary for a master's in computer science student in US, let's say, should be around $75,000 to $85,000. And here is the average salary for PhD in computer science in the US according to Bureau of Labor Statistics, salary.com, pay scale, etc. So they are saying that the average salary for a software engineer with a PhD is around $150,000 per year, and average salary for a research scientist with a PhD is around $130,000 per year. Average salary for a data scientist with a PhD is around $120,000 per year. Okay, so it's definitely higher than masters, but don't forget the fact that you're spending almost 5 years extra, at least 3 years if you're doing in continuation as well. So somewhere between 3 to 7 years extra is what you're spending on your PhD. So this difference in the salary, is it justified? Is it good enough for you or not? Just keep that in mind, because monetary wise it may not justify that I'm spending 5 years more just to get that 50,000 extra dollars, So apart from that, think of the career paths, and you should do PhD if you're looking for a career path which absolutely justifies the need for a PhD. For example, if you want to work in R&D labs only, and in US most of the R&D labs will hire PhDs only. So yes, if you want to work in core R&D departments, that PhD is a good idea. If you want to become a professor and go into the route of academia, then most likely you'll have to do a postdoc and then apply for a professorship, and in that case you have to have a PhD in US. So PhD in US is a very glamorous thing, I would say, and professors are highly respected, and yes, you will feel attracted towards that option once you're in grad school. But do think of what do I want to work in the long term, and whether PhD is required for that or not. And now when I ended up on Wall Street, there were some PhDs with us, obviously older than us because they had spent that extra years in the grad school, and their salaries would be higher, but I think similar amount, maybe $30,000 extra. So monetary wise it honestly does not make that much of a difference. But yes, if you are so passionate about research, you want to work on those research problems, then PhD is the right thing. But don't try to do it just because you think it's going to get you more money, because that ROI may not be justified. Okay, let me talk about my story now. So I was doing my master's with thesis at UIUC, right? I was working as a research assistant under Professor Nitin Vaidya, and I did my thesis and couple of projects there with him, and he was happy enough with my work, so he was willing to extend me for a PhD in his lab itself. So I had that real opportunity to do a PhD, and I was really attracted towards that option. I was very seriously considering it, because when you're in grad school, you look at how respected these profs are, and world just seems binary at that point. World just seems divided between PhDs and non-PhDs at that point, and I really seriously considered doing a PhD. But in the end I did not, because I had a very good offer from Wall Street at that time. That meant I could move to New York City, start working there. So I felt like I was not committed enough to research, and I did not know whether research is my thing or not, and that is why I decided that okay, let me continue with my job and see how it goes. So I dropped out of that PhD option, and I just ended up graduating with a master's. I don't think I have regrets looking back now, because I've seen some PhDs and they're really passionate about their research problems and research statements. You're working on one problem for 3 to 4 years, right? Going really deep. Whether I was cut out for that or not, I'm not sure. And this fact itself that I'm not sure maybe shows that it's okay. I was okay without a PhD as well. By the way, other day I was watching Oppenheimer, right? And that again created that urge of being back in the university and maybe working on the research problems, because it's really good environment in US universities, and you'll see what I mean when you end up going there. So anyways, no regret for me of leaving that PhD option. But yes, it looks really lucrative, and if you're at all passionate for research, then you would really love doing that in US. Okay, so lastly, I just want to add one more thing, that please don't do this. And what am I talking about? So I had a client who ended up applying to PhD programs just because he wanted to get funding, because chances of funding goes go up when you're applying for PhD, because university really wants to fund you and retain you. They want to make it easier for you to work with the university, right? So their priority is to first fund the PhD students. Then if they have something left, then only they will hire MS students. So what many people do, especially IITians, they will, like, even if they're not sure whether they want to do PhD or not, even if they don't want to do PhD, they will end up applying for PhD program, get the funding, and then finish their masters and graduate with a masters, and then they'll leave the PhD program in between. I saw many people doing this at UIUC. Now this is really frowned upon by these universities and professors. They get really pissed off and they note that, like, they funded you for 2 years and now you're just taking this MS degree and leaving for a job. So I don't think it's a good hygiene, and if it happens too many a times, some universities can even blacklist your college, which means that any future applicant from your college will not be considered for admission at this university. So, like, guys, I think this is a really bad practice. Apply for PhD if you're really interested in PhD. Now, it may happen that you went there and you suddenly found out that no, this is not for me. You have a legit reason of, like, not continuing for PhD. But please don't treat it as a shortcut just for getting funding. That's a really bad practice, and like your juniors might end up suffering for it. So I would just request that, like, please don't be selfish. If you have no interest in PhD, simply apply for masters. That's what I did. Okay, so PhD is not for everyone, as we saw. Like, make sure that you have really thought this through, because this decision not only impacts you, but maybe your spouse, your families, if you have dependent kids or something, or even your parents, because you're going to stay out there for longer. And the kind of jobs available to PhD would be slightly different for, like, other normal jobs out there. So are you cut out for it? Is that the life you want to pursue? If so, then please go for it. It's a wonderful thing, and especially US is a great place to do PhD. But if you're not sure, then just simply go for masters, explore your options, and then go for PhD. How did you like this video? Does this advice make sense or not? Have I forgotten anything? And if you have any more questions, then post it in the comment box below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So, okay, so that's it from my side. I'll see you guys next week, and I hope you're taking care. Bye-bye.